Welcome to Nordic Love Stories. Before we begin, subscribe and become part of our family, where every story reminds us that one act of kindness can change a life forever. The wind screamed across the frozen plains of Montana as a small girl stood alone beside a broken wooden bridge, clutching a faded blue ribbon against her heart. She had been waiting for someone who might never return, but before the sun disappeared behind the snow-covered mountains, a lonely cowboy would make a promise that would place both of their lives in terrible danger. The winter of 1885 had turned the frontier into a land of ice and silence. Travelers hurried through the streets of Silver Ridge with their heads down, while shopkeepers locked their doors before sunset. Near the edge of town, 7-year-old Emma Brooks stood shivering beside the old bridge every morning and every evening. Her boots were torn, her brown coat was far too thin for the bitter wind, and the only thing she carried was a small cloth satchel that belonged to her mother. Most people noticed her, but nobody stopped for longer than a few seconds. Some believed her parents had abandoned her. Others simply looked away because helping a stranger often brought trouble. Emma remembered the last words her mother whispered before disappearing into the storm. "Wait here, sweetheart. Someone with a good heart will find you." Those words became the only hope she had left. Miles away, 40-year-old cowboy Ethan Hayes guided his horse along the snowy trail towards Silver Ridge. Ethan owned a modest ranch hidden between pine forests and frozen hills. He was respected across the valley because he never lied and never broke a promise, but the cheerful young man he once was had disappeared years earlier after losing the woman he planned to marry to a deadly fever. Since then, he buried himself in hard work and long days beneath the open sky, believing loneliness was easier than another broken heart. As he entered town to buy winter supplies, something unusual caught his attention. Beside the broken bridge sat a tiny girl, her face pale from the cold, but her eyes still searching every passing stranger. Ethan immediately pulled on the reins and climbed down from his horse. He slowly walked toward her, careful not to frighten her. "Hello there," he said gently. "Are you waiting for someone?" Emma looked at him with frightened blue eyes before lowering her head. She had learned that trusting strangers could be dangerous. Ethan removed his thick wool coat and carefully wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked surprised. "You'll freeze," she whispered softly. Ethan smiled. "I've survived colder nights than this." Emma held the coat tightly, as if it were the first warm thing she had felt in days. After a long silence, she asked, "Why are you being kind to me?" Ethan looked into her tired eyes and quietly answered, "Because nobody should face winter alone." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "Mama said someone kind would come." Ethan knelt beside her. "What's your name?" "Emma Brooks." "Do you have family nearby?" She slowly shook her head. "Mama left 3 days ago to find my father. She told me to stay here until she came back." Ethan looked around the empty street. Several townspeople watched from their windows, yet nobody stepped outside. His heart grew heavy. Before he could speak again, Emma gently held his hand and whispered the words that changed everything. "Please, don't leave me too." Ethan felt something inside him awaken after years of silence. He squeezed her tiny hand and gave a calm nod. "I won't leave you, Emma. That's my promise." Neither of them realized that someone hidden across the street had witnessed the entire moment. And before the night was over, that secret observer would ride to deliver the news to the most feared land baron in Montana. The cold morning sun had barely touched the snowy hills when Ethan Hayes lifted Emma onto his horse and guided them toward his lonely ranch hidden beyond the pine forest. The little girl held tightly to his coat, still afraid that if she let go he might disappear like everyone else. The small cabin was warm, filled with the smell of fresh bread and burning firewood. Waiting inside was Grace Morgan, a gentle widow who often helped Ethan during the harsh winters. The moment Grace saw the frightened child, her heart broke. She wrapped a warm blanket around Emma, prepared hot soup, and quietly brushed the snow from her tangled hair. Emma had almost forgotten what kindness felt like. While the little girl rested beside the fireplace, Grace noticed the faded blue ribbon tied around the cloth satchel. "Where did you get that?" she asked softly. Emma smiled sadly. "Mama tied it before she left. She said as long as I kept it safe, we would find each other again." Ethan watched silently, realizing the ribbon meant far more than a simple piece of cloth. Later that afternoon, he rode back to Silver Ridge to search for answers. The old blacksmith remembered seeing Emma's parents weeks earlier. A shopkeeper whispered that they had argued with Victor Blackwood, the richest ranch owner in the county, a man feared for stealing land from struggling families through threats and lies. Nobody dared challenge him because his hired gunmen controlled almost every road leading into town. Ethan returned home carrying more questions than answers. As darkness covered the valley, Emma slowly opened her mother's satchel. Inside was a silver pocket watch, an old family photograph, and a folded letter carefully hidden beneath the cloth. Ethan unfolded it and began reading. Emma's mother explained that her husband had uncovered proof that Victor Blackwood had forced dozens of honest families from their land using fake contracts signed with corrupt officials. They planned to expose him before disappearing. If anything happened to them, whoever found the letter must protect Emma, because she was the only person who knew where the remaining evidence had been hidden. Ethan slowly lowered the paper, understanding that the frightened little girl beside the fire was no ordinary orphan. She was the final piece of a dangerous secret. Before anyone could speak, loud hoofbeats echoed outside. Ethan quietly reached for his rifle, while Grace pulled Emma behind her. Through the frosted window, several riders surrounded the cabin. A tall man wearing a long, dark coat stepped forward with complete confidence. His cold, gray eyes searched every corner of the ranch before stopping on Ethan. "Open the door!" he called. Ethan stepped outside without fear, closing the door firmly behind him. The stranger smiled without kindness. "I'm Victor Blackwood." Ethan remained silent. Victor continued, "The child inside belongs with me." Ethan's voice became cold. "She doesn't belong to anyone." Victor's smile disappeared. "You're protecting something you don't understand, Cowboy." Ethan folded his arms. "Then explain it." Victor took one step closer. "Give me the girl, and I'll forget this little mistake ever happened." Ethan never moved. "My answer is no." For a long moment, neither man spoke as the icy wind howled across the ranch. Finally, Victor climbed back onto his horse. Before leaving, he looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "Every promise has a price, Mr. Hayes. Soon you'll learn how expensive yours will be." The riders disappeared into the darkness, leaving only fresh hoofprints in the snow. Inside the cabin, Emma slowly walked toward Ethan. Her small hands trembled as she asked the question she feared most. "Is he going to take me away?" Ethan gently knelt before her and placed his hands on her shoulders. "Not while I'm breathing." Emma believed him, but neither of them knew that before another sunrise, someone they had trusted for years would secretly reveal the ranch's location to Victor Blackwood, placing every soul inside the cabin in greater danger than ever before. Before dawn, Ethan Hayes was awakened by the frantic barking of his ranch dog. He rushed outside with his rifle and immediately saw fresh hoofprints circling the cabin. Someone had been watching them during the night. Grace hurried Emma into the cellar, while Ethan searched the snowy fields. Then he noticed a wounded rider stumbling toward the barn. The stranger collapsed into the snow before whispering, "Don't shoot. I came to help." Ethan carefully lowered his rifle and recognized the man from the old family photograph inside Emma's satchel. It was Daniel Brooks, Emma's father. Weak from his injuries, Daniel explained that Victor Blackwood's men had captured him after he discovered records proving the rancher had stolen land from dozens of honest families across Montana. He escaped only hours earlier because he refused to let Emma grow up believing her parents had abandoned her. Emma rushed into her father's deep arms, crying with relief as Daniel held her tighter than ever before. "I promised I would come back," he whispered. "I was just fighting to keep that promise." Ethan watched silently, realizing that true love was measured not by easy days, but by the battles people survived for one another. Daniel then revealed the final secret. Before he was captured, he had hidden every original land document beneath the floor of the abandoned church outside Silver Ridge. Those papers could destroy Victor Blackwood forever. Ethan knew they had only one chance. As the first light of morning spread across the valley, Ethan, Daniel, Grace, and Emma quietly rode toward the old church. But Victor had already learned about the documents through the traitor who had secretly followed Ethan from town. Armed riders surrounded the church before anyone could escape. Victor stepped forward with complete confidence. "Give me the papers," he demanded, "and perhaps I'll spare the child." Ethan calmly stood between Victor and Emma. "You'll have to go through me first." The silence broke as several townspeople suddenly appeared behind Ethan. Farmers, blacksmiths, merchants, and ranch hands who had suffered under Victor's cruelty finally refused to stay silent. Inspired by one cowboy's courage, they stood together for the first time. Seeing the crowd grow larger, the county marshal rode into the churchyard with deputies from the neighboring county, carrying warrants that Daniel had secretly arranged before his capture. The hidden documents were uncovered beneath the old wooden floor, exactly where Daniel had described. Every forged contract, every stolen deed, and every false signature exposed Victor's crimes beyond denial. With nowhere left to run, Victor Blackwood was arrested, while the people of Silver Ridge watched the man who had ruled through fear finally lose everything. Months later, spring covered Montana with green fields and blooming wildflowers. Laughter once again filled Ethan's ranch. Daniel rebuilt his family's small farm nearby, while Emma visited Ethan and Grace almost every day. Working side by side through the long winter had also changed Ethan and Grace. Their quiet friendship slowly became love, proving that broken hearts could heal when kindness opened the door. One peaceful evening, Emma sat beside Ethan on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. She smiled and asked, "Do you remember the promise you made beside the bridge?" Ethan looked at her with warm eyes and nodded. "I'll remember it for the rest of my life." Emma rested her head against his shoulder. "You stayed." Ethan smiled gently. "Some promises are too important to break." From that day forward, the lonely bridge stood empty, not because people stopped passing it, but because no frightened child ever had to wait there alone again. In Silver Ridge, they would always remember that the strongest heroes were not the fastest gunfighters, but the ordinary people who chose kindness when everyone else chose to walk away.